Welcome back to Heart and Soul's Yoga Life channel. Today, again, with our friend Lauren Becker, who is a relationship and intimacy coach and is working with people who want to relate to themselves in a more deep and more authentic way to then open up into relationship from this very real point and holistic point, I guess. Very much involved with body work, very much involved with integrating the mind and the physical body and the other emotional bodies, etc., etc. What we have thought about today was to discuss how avoiding parts of ourselves can impact intimacy. I don't know about you, if you are there watching, if you've ever found yourself, for example, suppressing your anger or avoiding being overly exuberant or feeling guilty or shameful about something and therefore dulling yourself down. So Lauren has some really good insights about how to open yourself up fully and embrace all of who you are. Lauren, tell us a little bit about that. How can we stop dulling ourselves down and avoiding those not quite so termed awesome parts of ourselves?
So I feel like first and foremost, it's the willingness to actually acknowledge that that's something that we're doing. We have been taught so many different things around what they mean about us as a person. And usually this is what arises when these things arise in our life. And I'm talking about the things that are when we go into maybe intimate conversations and we don't want to have the conversation because it makes us feel a certain way, or when, maybe there's a topic of life that, comes up often and we don't necessarily want to talk about it or go into it. Usually it brings up something within us, and if we were to let ourselves go into it, then it would mean something about us if we did. And having the willingness and the courage to actually go into it is the first step to doing this. There's actually a scale of emotions called the Map of Consciousness by Dr. David R. Hawkins. And at the very, very bottom so it's essentially a scale of emotions. And at the very bottom of the emotional chart is shame and guilt. Yeah. And then midway, you've got courage. So courage is the very necessary thing that is needed, emotion that is needed to action in order to disperse and dissolve any of, I guess, the resistance that wants to come up, any of the shame or the guilt or the lower types of sensations in our body that want to arise when we meet that thing. So our willingness to first and foremost go into it. And creating a safe space for ourselves. So this might be with another person that we trust. It might be with a professional. It could be within a group environment as well. Yeah. It could also be just simply by ourselves, creating an environment that feels really comfortable and really, really safe to let ourselves explore. The way that I really love to look at it is, I don't know about you, but I really love to travel the world, and I like to look at this situation as I'm actually exploring the world with the same type of perspective.
Absolutely. I know that in the style of coaching that I practice, we actually speak about my map of the world, which totally relates to that. It's like, this is my reality. And I often frame this for people, or this is where you are right now, this is where you want to go. And there are more direct ways of going there, but there's a deep, dark crevice, some sort of like black hole that you are desperately trying to avoid, that you are choosing to not go anywhere near. And therefore, you are having to try all these other, scenic routes to trying to get where, because we are so strong at avoiding it. For example, this whole, like just sitting here, right, filming content for a video channel. Like, a lot of people have so much shame around it, or so much fear around how they will be perceived, how they will be seen, and what other people will think about it, especially if a topic is a more controversial one. And so as long as you avoid that, you can't really take the direct route that leads to where you want to be. Funnily enough, yesterday evening, I was watching Brené Brown's live on Netflix. That's fantastic. Can highly recommend Brené Brown's talk. She works with courage and vulnerability. She's a shame researcher, has written a bunch of fantastic books. I'll put a link down in the comment section afterwards. And she describes this so beautifully, that courage can't exist without the willingness to be vulnerable. Maybe you talk about, you can talk to us a little bit about vulnerability in this context and how that feeds into your work with people.
Absolutely. I actually used to work solidly with people with their shame and their guilt, and it can be really vulnerable, really, really vulnerable, because we have, again, made it mean something about us as a person if it was to come up. And you're right, courage is the very thing that's needed in order to go into feeling these emotions. And the more we can exercise our courage and our vulnerability, the more we have the capacity to explore these different parts of ourselves, and the more we have the capacity to feel these different areas of ourselves. And what I've noticed from the work that I've done with other people is that when we can feel more of any emotion, it opens up the doorway to feel more joy and more pleasure and more excitement as well. And it's equally as relevant to having joy as they're both necessary. They're both necessary.
And the thing is, if we are not willing to look at the ugly stuff, we're dulling down the positives. Imagine, for example, you wanting to be really passionate and really energetic. If you are suppressing anger, for example, as a feeling that is not appropriate, you don't want to be that angry person, don't want to show up as a screw. Is that true? Here you go with embarrassing stuff caught on tape, right? We'll leave that in. So you don't want to show up as an angry shrew. If you dial that down and you're choosing to not fully show up and embrace that, you will at the same time cap the level of passion that you can live in your life. And that is a price you can pay. If that is what you want, absolutely do so. But I think if we're looking around in society and people who are then showing up with depression, with boredom, with like a nagging sense of this is not the life I signed up for, with having to have my first glass of wine at 3:30, 4 p.m. in the afternoon to just kind of take off that nagging sense of something is missing. It's a question, are you willing to pay that price? Or are you willing to take the risk of be all of who you are, including that ugly stuff sometimes, and go all out? So how can we do that? If somebody who's watching this is now at that threshold where they go like, whatever I've been doing so far isn't getting me the results that I want. Yes, I'm polite, and yes, everybody somehow likes me, but the spice in life is missing. What are steps we can take to start embracing that? Looking at it is one of it. You already said that. How? What else?
So the action steps are really important as well. And a lot of the times, this is where the vulnerability piece comes in. There's actually a quote by Jensen Dow, and the quote is, if you're not risking in life, your heart is dying. And
that makes so much sense if I think of a lot of my clients. Yep.
Yeah, it's actually my favorite quote. And I studied through Chinese medicine, and the heart element is in the fire element of our life. So what I've noticed over time is that when we shut down the risk of the heart, and I'm not talking about risk that is, maybe threatening to us. I'm talking about risk that feels enlivening, risk that feels maybe exciting, something that pulls you in a way. That's the type of risk. And when we start to exercise that, then eventually our courage starts to come back online, our excitement starts to come back online, our passion for life, because it's pumping the muscle of the heart, and we start to really come alive again. And so taking action in the direction, and a lot of the times this is coupled with maybe not necessarily making any sense, the action that we take. We might get little kind of hits to go to certain places or to do something, or maybe to take a different route to work, and we don't necessarily know why, but it's so incredibly important for us to follow that, because that eventually starts to lead us back to our passion and our aliveness for life.
Yeah. 100%. Reminds me of a story I heard years ago from actually someone else's client who I was mentoring. Part of my work is mentoring coaches. And there was a young woman who had deferred decision making to her partner for years and years and years. So she hadn't done anything, booked anything. It was always him organizing everything. And she came to the conclusion that her going out and booking a ferry to go to a special, I think, island place just for a weekend, etc., for her to just go and do that. And she made that commitment, and it was a really scary thing for her at the time. I remember the next time her coming back and being so excited and had been perfect. And yes, some stuff had gone wrong, but she had worked it out. Then it's not even about getting it right necessarily. It's often about just taking that step, making that leap of faith. And it might, if you're someone who is an action taker, it might sound like, really booking a couple of tickets. But it really is about where you are at in your life right now and where your comfort zone sits and what it means for you to push your comfort zone. If you're booking tickets all the time, that's not your action steps, but I bet that there is something in your life that you are avoiding, where you know if you push that little bit harder, you could go there, and you're not doing it. So figure out where your threshold sits. And it doesn't have to be big steps. It's just taking that little leap that feels a little bit scary, right? It's like getting back into the dating pool when you've been through a really difficult breakup. Doesn't mean you have to get it right and meet Mr. Right immediately, but it means taking the risk again of at least looking, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So what else? So we've now come to the point where we are pushing and we are taking those little leaps, and we are probably seeing results. Sometimes they are great, sometimes there might be a bit mixed results, but we feel proud of ourselves that we've put ourselves out there. And then what's next?
It's really, really incredibly important to actually let ourselves be with what's actually coming up. So a lot of the times when we do these things, we can go into them and do them, and we notice all the beautiful things that are coming up, and it's exciting and it's enlivening, but then all of a sudden it's like, okay, cool, what's the next thing? It's incredibly important for us to really marinate in that excitement and that aliveness and the experience of that moment as we do that. Because as we do that, what happens is we're conditioning our body and our nervous system to get used to having that and feeling that, which then not only attracts more into our life, but also it fills us and enriches us and our hearts as well. It's literally like pouring it directly into our hearts. So it's really important to marinate in the experience as you experience it.
That's awesome. And it almost sounds like creating a blueprint, right? Where if you really marinate, I love that metaphor, by the way, if you really are in it and you stay in it and you feel it and almost like pick it up with every cell of your body, that you're creating a mental blueprint about that is what it looks like, this is what it sounds like, this is what it feels like, this is what I'm telling myself in this moment. And that creates a reference point that you can then aim for the next time and go back to again, right? Whether that is in going back to the memory of it or actually recreating something that feels like that.
Yes, and our nervous system has essentially been conditioned over time to only feel a certain capacity of energy running through it. And a lot of the times anything outside of that energy triggers our fight-flight system. So when when we experience something that's extremely joyful, that can also trigger us to go into fight-flight. So we shut down and we don't want to feel that. We don't let ourselves fully engage in the capacity in which it could be. So by allowing ourselves to truly saturate our nervous system in that moment, in that feeling, it not only holds the reference point for that, but it then over time has the capacity, because it kind of grows to that, to know that that's safe and that's okay to feel. Over time, it will essentially desire to expand even more. So that joy that you experience in that moment can simply expand even more and more and more and more. And the richness that you feel, the aliveness, the passion that you feel starts to grow and expand in ways that you could never even maybe thought was possible.
Yeah, amazing. And it sounds ironic. I remember when I first heard about things like somebody having a fear of success or having a fear of having it all. I'm like, why would you feel that? That's great. Like I'm all in for it. But the truth is, for some people, and it's more common than you might think, is that they have experienced loss in a moment where they felt they had everything, whether that's as a little kid when the world was whole and happy, and then suddenly there is a divorce or there's something else very intense that happens, is that it's almost associated with everything is going great. When is the other shoe dropping? I remember that Brene Brown speaks about the other shoe dropping as well. And I remember that I've done that in certain areas of my life, for example, in relationships, waiting for the other shoe to drop because it almost feels like it's too good to be true. How can we counter that and make sure that, you say, marinating in the feeling? Are there other things we can do to curb that and to be able to be with it without feeling the need to run away?
Yeah, so I think it's important to know that that feeling's going to come up, because it's almost like a habit pattern, habitual response that we've created in our body. But like any habitual response, we can change it. So the more that we marinate in that feeling, the more that starts to change it. Continuing to go into different scenarios that engage more of these exciting and enriching and enlivening experiences for ourselves. And also something that I really like to do is to stay in a hug a little bit longer and really feel the hug a little bit longer. Just tiny little things like that. It doesn't have to be anything large, but or maybe even going on a walk and being outside and being completely mesmerized and soaking in the richness and the beauty of the nature around you. You know, you can literally do it in your everyday life. So these things, the more we cultivate them and the more we immerse ourselves in them, the more it creates the foundational pillars for success of this to be the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And gratitude, what you're just mentioning, is so important. I mean, I have that almost every day when I'm walking, both when I'm here in Sydney visiting, when I'm up in the Northern Rivers where I live. We are pretty blessed to live where we are. But this noticing the little things and seeing how much beauty there is. And it doesn't always have to be a spectacular natural setting. It can just be the intricacy of a little flower by the roadside, right? It can be that cute little puppy up the road that always comes jumping, you know which one I mean, that always comes jumping to the house, and it's just the sweetest little thing. It can be a delicious meal prepared by someone where I feel really cared for. It doesn't have to be these huge things, but cultivating gratitude. And what I find also, cultivating gratitude for the challenges in life and where they have led us. I find that that's a really helpful way of looking at things, to prevent ourselves from feeling we have to shy away from the challenges. It's like when I look back, the person I have becoming, I am not that person because of all the good, happy, easy stuff that happened, but most of what has formed me to be who I am, and it sounds weird to admit that on camera, but I quite like myself, is this is like no shame at all, has happened because of the ugly and the challenging and the sometimes quite awful stuff that has happened. So if we are avoiding, I'll formulate a question from that, if we are avoiding going there where it could potentially be hurtful, could potentially be dangerous, putting ourselves out there, maybe opening up ourselves for criticism, right? If we avoid that, we are cutting out so much of the potential for growth that can help us become all of who we are and truly fulfill our potential, right?
Absolutely. And there's two parts that I want to add to that. The more we let ourselves see these parts of ourselves and embrace them, the more that our partner can also do the same.
Yeah.
It's literally like, when we get in relationships, we spend a lot of the time years with this person, and over time what can happen is there can be a boredom that arises, or a disconnect or a disassociation. And so the more we explore ourselves and accept that and bring that to the relationship, the more it's going to keep that dancing dynamic within the relationship, that excitement alive.
Yeah.
The other part that I also want to add, just to something that you mentioned around gratitude, is being with the gratitude and amplifying it in the body, allowing that energy that we feel so deeply within our body to literally amplify.
Yeah.
Like, how do we let that soak into every single cell, how do we feel that in every single part of our body? How do we amplify it?
How do you do this? Like, I know that in NLP, when I work with people, I have certain techniques that I use to help them amplifying a feeling. Is there a special technique that you have for that?
Yes, I get them to breathe into, so presence into that area where we feel it, get them to breathe into that area. And as we're breathing, imagining it expanding throughout the body. So you're literally directing that energy into other parts of your body as you breathe. So it's expanding and inviting it to amplify. So all of these intentions open up the space for that to
absolutely.
occur.
And it's funny when you said before marinating and soaking in that energy. That's very similar to how I work with people, where it's like, let that inform every last cell in your body and really feel what does it do to your brain? Like, how does your thinking process change when you are coming from a place of gratitude, for example, rather than fear? How does, what do you hear yourself say, and how do you speak, and what's your even body language like when you're coming from a place of that challenging, new, different sort of energy than when you are sitting in that old, rather gray, rather limited framework, right?
Yeah, and it's like, how do you even take it down into your little toe? How do you take it down into the soles of your feet or the tips of your fingers? How do you feel that in that, and then notice how you come out of it and be.
And it's magical when you're still buzzing with that kind of energy. It's amazing. And I've had this a couple of months ago with a client, and I bet you hear that all the time, that he says like, and then I went out of your office and I went driving and I stopped at a petrol station, and suddenly I noticed everybody was smiling at me. And then I felt like smiling even more. Is that normal when, like, for the next 24 hours, everything seems to be a little bit magical? And I'm like, yeah, it can be. It doesn't have to be for everyone, but it is pretty magical, because it is basically, if we are coming from a different filter, if it's almost like if you're wearing pink colored glasses, right? Rose colored glasses, I think we say, or blue colored glasses, suddenly everything looks different. So coming through a filter of a new energy that you're inviting in, whether that's gratitude or whether that's joy or whether that's enthusiasm, whatever it is, because all these negative energies, just to lead back to that, the negative feelings that we are trying to avoid are always intimately linked, like two sides of the same coin, with one of those positive ones. And as long as we are avoiding facing that darker part of ourselves, we can't really access the light either. Like, there is never just one, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So as always, if you guys are interested to hear more from Lauren, to explore more with her or more about her, what her work can do for you, if you want to go more into your body and explore this and go on a journey of self-discovery with her, we're going to leave Lauren's details at the bottom of this video. And at the same time, if you have any experiences you would like to share or have any questions, please drop them into the comment section below. If you enjoy our content, you know what to do to follow our channel, and hit the bell button if you want to get notifications when the next videos come out. Thank you very much, Lauren, for being here again, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.